Good evening and welcome back to episode number 27 of True Crime with the Bad Girl, the Playa, and Dangerous Dave. Dangerous Dave soon to make his run-in. I am Benny Scala, a.k.a. the Playa, and with me as always is my partner in True Crime. She is a New England Professional Wrestling Hall of Famer. She's Archie's mom. She is the Siren of Scituate, and she is our very bad co-host, the one and only Boston Bad Girl, Brittany Brown. Brittany, how are you?
I am doing well. How are you doing tonight?
I am doing wonderful. Can't
Great.
complain. Not a complaint in the world. And, well, folks, we do have a very special guest this evening. If the face looks familiar, it's because he and I have teamed up to do 206 episodes of Dan and Benny in the Ring. And I'm talking about none other than Dan Sebastiano. Dan is here because he has done extensive research on this case. So, Dan, a pleasure and welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. This should be a lot of fun. I know those that have seen me in the podcast world before, it's always talking about sports, but I've mentioned before on the show my educational background. I have, multiple degrees, including a master's studying criminal justice, various things. This case specifically jumped out at me. For those that remember the times when I was at Maryland, we still needed permission from the Boulder Police Department for the records we used for educational research because it was considered an active case. So the files and everything. I mean, I joked with Benny off set before we were talking about this, an old friend of mine, that there's probably people interviewed in that Netflix documentary that have spent less time on this case than I have. So I'm glad I get to talk about it.
I'm not going to doubt that. So, guys, before we do anything, we got to take care of a little bit of business here to pay the bills. So give me 1 second here. And folks, if you have been injured in a car accident, make sure you speak to our good friend Adam Burbrower at the Burbrower Law Firm. Adam and his crew do things the right way and get great results. And not only is Adam a great attorney, but the dude has framed posters of Ernie the Cat Lad and the unpredictable Johnny Rods in his lofts. How cool is that? At least the guy's got good taste. So if you see Adam climbing up the ladder at your local community pool to nail that ever elusive Triple Lindy, you'll probably notice superstar Billy Graham tattooed on his back and Bret the Hitman Hart on his chest. Adam's not only the man of the hour, the man with the legal power, too sweet to be sour. He is also the excellence of elocution. So Adam's not only a great guy, but he's an avid WWF/WWF historian. Who else can get you a great settlement, rather? Well, yeah, I guess he'll give you a statement with the settlement. While simultaneously breaking down a Don Morocco, Mario Mancini squash match. I'm sure there's plenty of those around. So check out Adam at burbrowerlaw.com and follow him on Facebook. And don't forget to tell him that the Bad Girl, the Playa, Dangerous Dave, and Dan the Man sent you. So much for our great host. And all right. Well, guys, tonight's case has been on our minds and in our hearts for, it's hard to believe, 28 years now, right around this time in 1996. So I'm talking about the very tragic case of JonBenét Ramsey. JonBenét was only 6 years old when she was murdered in her own home in Boulder, Colorado on December 25th/26th, 1996. And for the past 28 years, this case has been the ultimate whodunit, as millions of us around the country, actually around the world, have played amateur detective, trying to figure out who the murderer is. And I'm anxious to hear from everyone, including our chat room. But I want to lead off with Dan, as he mentioned. He has done probably as much research on this case as anyone, and he also does have a very decided opinion, which I'm really interested to hear because I just watched this over the weekend, the recent Netflix documentary, Who Killed JonBenét Ramsey. Dan hit it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, when I pitched the idea, and I know you bounced it off Brittany, and she seemed really excited to hear about this. The Netflix documentary should have set up every red flag you could think of in narration when the opening credit said, produced by John Ramsey. the fact that he was involved in its production, you knew it was going to be incredibly one-sided, and it was. If I was to describe it, I mean, it was inaccurate to the point of bordering on fraud. I mean, it's not surprising, like I said, considering he was a producer and he worked closely with the crew. I mean, there's evidence left out and entirely details which are taken out of context. To the at best case scenario, some of the out of context items are intellectual dishonesty. Others, it's downright bias. I mean, and there's points where there's some of the decisions, the creative direction decisions are. The bias is the only explanation. This was a hit piece, or I should say a puff piece, because of how the narrative it tried to paint. And it could only do that through just incredible factual inaccuracies. Like I said, stuff being left out, stuff being taken out of context intentionally, false narratives being painted. And it really frustrated me because I've seen, the social media discourse just in the past, I would say, 2 weeks of people, all of a sudden the lexicon is changing and people are talking about, oh, I can't believe you thought this, or I can't believe you thought that. And you're seeing real time damage being done to the narrative because of this false information. Unfortunately, we live in an era when, one inaccurate document, just ask anyone who works at SeaWorld, one inaccurate documentary can ruin entire industries of things. And, it's really, the record needs to be set straight. And I hope we get a chance to do that tonight.
Absolutely. So, Brittany, what's your take on this whole thing? Did you get to see the documentary?
I did. I watched the whole thing, and I was also shocked when I saw that he was involved in it. I almost wanted to turn it off, to be honest with you. But I said, you know what? I'm going to watch it. I'm going to see what I think is going to happen, and it did. I was shocked by it. I really was shocked by it. I don't understand why this was done with him being involved. I'd like to see it done, but not with him being involved like that.
Dan, I gotta tell you, I did not know. I did not know that he produced it. But like as I'm watching it, I'm thinking like this is a John Ramsey infomercial.
Yeah, it's exactly what it was.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, this is decidedly very one-sided and not what I thought.
And Brittany hit it on the head with, in the age. I mean, we live in the age of infotainment when documentaries and series. I mean, Tiger King can be successful. Like people are just want to consume documentaries and facts, and you listen to the numerous true crime podcasts and shows like this one, and this is the time when something like this should enter the ether, and this story should be told with that kind of narrative. But for it to be told from the perspective of look at how wonderful the family is, and here's all this other BS, it just kills the story. Because if someone tries to make a more accurate one later, then you have a B confrontation, and exactly. I think the damage is done, and that's unfortunate.
Right. And then one of the things you mentioned, and let's look at it here. I mean, it's kind of hard to see, but is the ransom note. And I was going to say you could probably I'll let you tee up on this, and I mean I might not even have anything to add, but
I was actually I kind of compiled some notes based on your questions, and I was going to start with the DNA, but the ransom note's a great place to start, because the biggest criticism I have for the Netflix documentary, I mean of the many, is the ransom note was barely touched on. It was less than 2 minutes of time where they focused on the narrative of the ransom note. It was mentioned a few times, but it was barely touched on. I mean, the fact is that the ransom note was a key piece of evidence that was used in the determinations of the investigators, of the police. And I'm talking the active police, not the years later independent consultants, detectives. The police investigating the crime that were in the house, that were doing the investigations. The ransom note was a key piece in determining a lot of what their conclusions, and it was barely touched on. I think it's important because Netflix notes an expert concluded that Patsy Ramsey wasn't the writer. They didn't state who the expert was or how this occurred, and that is entirely not true. At the time, in the years following the investigation, numerous handwriting experts. I think the key piece that was touched on that I think it really needs to have the record cleared was a detective investigator by the name of Don Foster. At the time he was recruited by the Boulder Police Department, he was the nation's leading handwriting expert. He was one of the world's leading handwriting experts. Like multiple countries and governments and police departments would bring him in to investigate handwriting. He reviewed over 70 pieces of handwriting samples. I believe that the total number was 73, but don't quote me on the specifics. And his conclusion was Patsy Ramsey is the only possible person that could have written that note. 100%. He said it. Obviously, that went against predetermined conclusions. I'll get to the DA later, but he's noted in the documentary, it mentions his findings, but then refers to him as discredited and just kind of dismisses the whole thing. The issue is he was never discredited. What ended up happening was he had sent, and this is again why I say the record has to be cleared, because he had sent a private message. This was before he had seen any evidence, before he was recruited by the Boulder Police Department. He had sent a private message where he said, hey, I'm looking into this case. Just from what I've seen on TV, I don't think the family's involved from what the media had been reporting. And they kind of painted that as, oh, you changed your mind, you're indecisive, you're this false, whatever. It reminds me, you look at the narrative, and not to get off topic, but you look at, every time people talk about everything from medicine to, government, economics, whatever, like, oh, science said this 30 years ago, and now they say that, so science is wrong. Like people, that's how facts work. He said, based on what I know, I don't think the family's involved. He then studied the case. He studied the handwriting samples extensively as the world's leading expert, and concluded, no, 100% she did it. And Netflix tried to paint him changing his mind after studying the evidence as discrediting him. That's not discrediting, and that's literally how evidence works. And then, the other thing I think too is important is other handwriting experts. They made it sound like they ruled out the family. It's like no, they didn't rule out the family. What they said, and this is the Boulder experts they had before they brought. Excuse me, but before they brought Don Foster in, was they were able to rule out friends, family, and the official report noted they were able to rule out everyone except Patsy Ramsey. And I think it's also important to note something that was intentionally left out is handwriting, and this is part of the FBI profile logs. Handwriting is only changed for one of two primary reasons. One, it's intentional, and two, an injury to your hand and or fingers that would cause you to hold pencils differently. Obviously, Patsy Ramsey didn't suffer any injuries. However, her handwriting was deliberately changed. After the police started investigating the handwriting of the note itself, of the ransom note, her handwriting intentionally changed. They had to go back and find older samples to prove, hey, this is your handwriting. So you have to, even if you believe they're innocent, you have to think that is a huge red flag that, hey, the police are trying to sample handwriting, and now I'm going out of my way to intentionally write my A's differently, my E's differently. And of course, a lot of it too is sentence structure and lexicon. Like when people talk, if I may, random fun fact for you, the Unabomber was captured because they released his manifesto, and he used a very specific expression in his manifesto that his brother immediately was like, I only know one person on earth that talks like that. And he contacted the FBI, and that led to the initial investigation. The ransom note used verbiage that she was known for talking. That ransom note was written by somebody who'd seen a lot of movies, but had never written a ransom note before. And she wrote like she talks. And immediately people were like, there's only, this is her. And the fact that Netflix just kind of glossed over that and pretended like the ransom note wasn't important is really the crux of why the family was suspected to begin with.
Didn't she say, Dan, she used the term, like attaché, I thought was a very strange term to use in that note. And also the term fat cat, like that wouldn't be something you'd think you'd see in a ransom note.
That's why I said she wrote it as if it was from the perspective that's somebody who'd seen some movies,
weren't there a couple of, get some rest? And there was a couple of lines that she used, or I should say the writer of the ransom note used that were, close to movies of that time.
Yes.
Very much so.
And all right, now correct me if I'm wrong. I read some. I don't even. Maybe it was even on the docuseries, but that it would have taken somebody about 21 minutes to write that note. Would you agree that's accurate?
Yes,
I would. Yeah.
and I think it's also important that the note was written from stationery with a pen that were both definitively linked to the home. So the ransom note was, if assuming, and we'll get to expand on the theory of the kidnapper in a moment, but whoever wrote that ransom note was in the house, went and found stationery, went and found a pen, and then spent 20 minutes writing this note before they left. It's, you start, I assume you're familiar with the term Occam's razor. The idea often shortened to the simple answer is the right one. If you remove the impossibilities, what remains is probable. And that's the thing. There's so many little pieces of evidence that the simple solution is it was written by someone in the house who was already in the house. And when you realize that was 2 children and 2 parents, you start limiting suspects. The narrative that it was somebody else that came in, it falls apart once you immediately apply logic to any of the arguments. And yes, 100%, this was written. To the idea that someone broke into the home and then spent hunting down paper and a pen and 20 minutes writing a note in the living room is foolish.
I mean, and you assuming it was a random person, wouldn't they have rifled through a whole bunch of stuff before they found that paper?
If I can shift thoughts for a second to the random person, the kidnappers would have, let me make sure I get this right. The kidnappers that came into that house, assuming, because that's the 2 prevailing theories. It was an outside person that broke in. It was someone in the home already. The person that came into that home would have been the most unprepared, ill-equipped kidnapper in the history of crime, because you didn't bring a note, you didn't bring a pen, you did, and again, we'll get to the details shortly, but the weapon that caused the head wound to JonBenét was the flashlight that was already in the house. The garrote that was used to strangle her was made with twine and a broken paintbrush from the mother's paint kit that was already in the house. And I'll get to the evidence that was also glossed over of why they know where that twine came from. And the knots in the wrist bindings and the garrote itself had JonBenét's hair in it, meaning those knots were made, those ties and knots were made in the house next to her body. So you're telling me someone broke into that house to kidnap her, didn't bring any rope, didn't bring any restraints, didn't bring a weapon, didn't bring a note, didn't bring a pen, they literally were just empty pocket, and then we'll wing it when we get here. Like, it's, again, it goes to the Occam's razor theory of it falls apart the second you apply even basic logic of crime to it.
Yeah. Brittany, you've been kind of quiet. What anything to add?
Well, I mean, the part that I've always tried to figure out is, did Patsy do it, or did Patsy cover up who did it?
Right.
And I always wondered that. And I always thought, at the beginning when this first happened, I always thought it was her. And I know there was some rumors back in the day that, she might have flipped out because JonBenét urinated in the bed and she just lost it and killed her. I don't know. But after many, many, many years went by, and just a few years ago, I saw the brother on Dr. Phil. That's when I completely changed my mind.
Kind of creepy, eh?
And beyond.
Right.
Beyond.
I think it's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I just feel like he did it, and the mother covered up for him.
Yeah,
that's how I feel. I don't know about you guys.
No, I think that certainly we can talk about that a bit more. Right. One thing that always, being a numbers guy, the one thing that's always has stayed with me is that the amount of the ransom, and Dan, I'm sure you can expand upon this, was pretty much identical to the year-end bonus he received as president of his company.
Correct.
So the kidnapper also happened to know that too, right? I mean,
exactly, and that shoots to hell the theory that he was indebted to some executive because he was the CEO. He was the head guy in the company, and They're
Exactly.
Colorado at the time, both Colorado and Georgia, where the residency in Atlanta, those are closed salary states. So it's his salary bonus. None of that would have been public record. That would have been somebody who with close connections to, and I know we'll get into the Patsy suspect, I assume later, but that would have been somebody with close knowledge. There was far too much personal information in the note to assume it was a stranger. And by the way, crimes against children, when they occur inside the home, it's less than 1% that it's a stranger, and if it's outside the home, it's only 3%. I'm at the age with the stranger danger, don't get in a car kind of thing. People forget that over 90% of all crimes against children are committed by someone the child knows. So this idea that some stranger would come in and magically have all this information also falls apart the second you apply logic to it.
And okay, so the dollar amount definitely got me, but the other thing and I really didn't think much about it until I watched the docuseries, was that, there were very explicit instructions on the money, and, you're going to get this phone call, and, if you don't follow these instructions, there's a 99% chance your daughter will be killed. I think they even said beheaded. But if you follow these instructions to the letter, you'll have 100% chance that that she will be returned to you. And so what is the very first thing Patsy does is defy the instructions of the letter, which, I mean, if you've got this letter and you thought, oh my God, what do I have to do? I mean, like, if it was me, God forbid, the very first thing I'm going to think of, what do I need to do to make sure that my child is returned safe to me? And it's given me, there was a lot of verbiage of what would happen if you did the wrong thing. And what did she do? She immediately, within like a couple of minutes? Yeah, we don't really know what she found.
Almost yeah. Well, that's assuming. Yeah, you have to assuming you believe the narrative of when they found the note and the location of everybody, which is unrelated. A story that changed. The official account the Ramseys gave the police changed twice, which is something Netflix didn't feel the need to mention. Which I think is also interesting. Speaking of which, the Ramsey stonewalled the investigation from the beginning. They hired a lawyer the day after the police officially were in the house. The list of demands that they gave the police to speak with them was ludicrous, to the point of, like I said, one of the people that gets the documentary names and the family kind of pointed the finger at was a family friend who was with a guy named Fleet White. He was with John Ramsey when he found her body, and Fleet White was the one that was kind of like, hey, kind of nudging the police, like, I've known this family a long time. They've never acted like this. If they're hiding something, like he was the one to kind of bring the attention of, this isn't a grieving family. This is clearly not normal. But it's just, it's just so much as far as, like I said, the evidence, and the ransom note was just one of the glaring pieces, and the documentary barely touched on it. It tried to dismiss it. It tried to make it sound like this unimportant junk, and it was like, no. Or even to the point where people are talking about handwriting analysis like it's junk science, and it's like, no, hang on, time out. The idea that you can look at someone's handwriting and the way they write their A's shows whether or not they're a psychopath or something like that. Yes, absolutely. That's, quackery. But the idea that I can compare two handwriting samples is incredibly scientific. It's been used for years. It's one there's a reason it's admissible evidence in court compared to things like the polygraph and stuff like that. So the fact that it's such a key piece of the story was dismissed pretty much right away would kind of set the stage for how biased, one-sided, and just inaccurate the story was going to be.
Now, wasn't there also, Dan, or Brittany, either one, wasn't there, I thought there was like a note that was actually started within the same notepad. Like I guess it said Mr. and Mrs., and then they stopped writing it, and then it was directly addressed to Mr. Ramsey.
Oh, I didn't know that.
The fact that it was written from stationery in the house. There is
right, but there was another note that had been started. I guess
there was a header that had been started, but that
yeah,
doesn't
right. I mean,
conclude.
all it said was
Yeah.
Mr. and Mrs. I think, and then I think it stopped right after that. So, I mean, you know, tell me like a
Correct.
random stranger is gonna, you know, somehow happen upon, you know, this
Take a rough
pad, this
draft.
Sharpie, and you know, oh, let me, you know, oh wait, that doesn't sound good. Let me start over again. In the meantime, like
Yeah.
they're in a family's house. I mean, how ridiculous is that?
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
I mean, when you think about it in those terms, it defies, you know, any rational explanation. But I wanted to real quick, Dan and Brittany, touch upon the 911 call. I kind of thought she was a bit off, and even the way she said there's been a kidnapping. I mean, would again, like if that was me, it's like I would say my daughter is missing, and maybe
Right.
you know, I mean, everybody processes things differently, but I don't get that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounded very staged too. The call did to me, at least. Every time I've heard it, it just sounded so fake, so staged, so like she already had it planned what she was going to say.
Right.
I think it's also important that she referred to it as, like you said, there's been a kidnapping.
Yeah.
At the point the 911 call was made, according to the official statements made by the family, she was only missing. You know, a 6-year-old is just missing. The first thing, and there was, by the way, no, and we'll get to that too, there's no sign of break-in or anything like that. You know, you wake up and your 6-year-old isn't immediately found, the first thing you do isn't call 911 and report a kidnapping. You call 911 and report a missing child. The fact that she already had the narrative of someone broke in the basement, took my kid, blah blah blah, before and according to the family, hadn't even been down there that day. It was incredibly suspicious about the details that were provided and the cold nature in which they were. It was very factually broken down.
Right.
Like Brittany said, very rehearsed.
There was also
And
something.
you guys,
Go ahead, Brittany.
sorry. Did you guys also see on the Netflix special that older interview that was never before seen, where she was specifically asked, did you know your husband, the amount of your husband's bonus? And she, I mean, it just looked like the fakest response ever. She didn't know? Come on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Bull is what I say to that.
there was something that they said, and I actually saw it on a couple other videos, that after she hung up the phone, that there was like further. I guess when you call 911, even though you hang up the phone, it still gets recorded. And she said something after she supposedly hung up with the the call taker, the 911 call taker.
Wow.
Yeah, Dan, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there's been some voice analysis on like what she was saying in the background. It was the issue that she was talking to somebody is, I think, the part that was focused on, as opposed to the exact verb, because obviously recorders and phone receivers being what they were in 96. It was the narrative that she's clearly like, how'd that sound kind of story. It was like, fine, and you shouldn't care about how you're coming off.
Oh my God.
Right. And now I also heard that there might have been like 3 voices, her, John, and the kid, Burke, which they said he was still in bed.
Right.
I heard one of them, like one theory was that she said, "How could you do this?" Or "Why did you do this?" or something like that, but I mean,
that's the only problem with the voice analysis, is that there's not a definitive it's number of pops heard on the Zapruder film type breakdown, that there's not a definitive agreement on what was being said in the background. But the fact is, like you said, she was talking to other people, and which also goes against the initial statements made at the police about who was where.
Yeah.
Right. Now the police get there pretty quick, right? They get there within a matter of 3 or 4 minutes.
Yeah, they happen to be, because obviously the location of the family to the narrative, and that's the other thing I think that's key. Obviously, I want to talk about the DNA evidence too, but the investigation, the documentary did everything it could to paint the police as this is the Keystone Cops. This is a bumbling doofus investigation.
Yes.
They botched everything.
Absolutely.
And there's some key points that are ignored. They didn't search the whole house, or they did, initially it's like, they didn't look for her. Well, yeah, they weren't looking for her. They were the police that responded to the scene were responding to a kidnapping. The first thing you do when you're responding to a kidnapping isn't search the house for the kid, so this idea that and then they didn't go into the basement, they didn't go into the wine cellar, and it's like, well, this because something that gets, again, big shock, left out. The wine cellar door had a wooden latch on it that opened and closed from the outside. The door was locked with the latch closed. So if there was anybody in the wine cellar at the time the police were there, there's no exit or entrance from the house. So if you're looking for evidence of a break-in, you're not going to look at the part of the house where there's no entrance or exit to the home. That wasn't incompetence. That's common narrative. And so you have that section of the investigation. You also, the basement door would have been closed at the time. They didn't initially search the room she was found because, again, like I said, no exits. The detectives that responded, this was after obviously the patrol units had been at the house first. The detectives that showed up, it was a simple miscommunication. The police, the uniformed officers told the detectives the home has been searched. So the detectives didn't search the basement because they were under the impression it had been searched. That's a mistake, but that's not this bumbling idiocy. And by the way, the door was still closed. And as far as the officers involved, nobody had gone down there yet. It wasn't until later, and this is where I think it really gets telling, is the agents that have responded. Again, you go further into the investigation. I'll get into some of the details. There was an FBI agent that was involved in the investigation. This was at the time that they were expecting a ransom call, a ransom call based on the note, and the call never came in. When the call never came in, John Ramsey disappeared for about an hour and a half, give or take. His whereabouts weren't known. He was somewhere on the grounds, but he had been lost. And realizing that's kind of sus, the FBI agent told him, hey, we're going to search your house specifically, he said, top to bottom. We're going to start in your master bedroom, and I want you, he picked one of the detectives, and he's like, you're going to go with her, and you're going to look upstairs with her. And he did that, and the agent testified that he did that specifically to keep John Ramsey busy and to keep him in someone's sight, because you just disappeared for an hour, and that's sus. Well, the agent finishes giving these instructions. John Ramsey immediately grabs his friend, grabs his arm, takes him downstairs, and starts searching the basement. And that's when they find the body, which, of course, he's down there. Now, people say, like, oh, the cops let him look, they let him move, or they let him go down there and contaminate the crime scene. They didn't let him do anything. He intentionally and deliberately didn't follow the instructions that were laid out to him by the agents on the scene. And that led to the contamination. So this narrative that the cops were just some bumbling crime scene, that's false. Fleet White, who was with him, commented that he opened the door to the wine cellar. He didn't know where the light switch was. It was dark, didn't see anything. Looks fine to me. Close the door. John Ramsey opened the door behind him. Oh my God, she's in there. So you have a room that we've established twice now is dark enough that you can't see in there, but John Ramsey can magically see that there's a body on the floor in there. And he turns it on. He knows exactly where she is. It's this, again, I'm not, I'm sure if he's still out there, I have no money. John, don't even bother trying to sue us. You'll get nothing from this. I'm not CBS. I'm not NBC. But so he disappears for an hour. He ignores the escort. They find the body. That he points at the window. He came in through the window, and he tells the detectives he found the window open. The crime scene investigators, not only is the window that was open, was it closed, but there were cobwebs around the window attached to both the window grating and the wall. So not only was it closed, but there was evidence that the window had not been opened for months, possibly years, who knows.
Wow.
I mean, it's so much. There's and then of course that gets into the I don't want to drift into conspiracy territory, but the district attorney who was investigating who was responsible for the case, he stonewalled a gentleman named Alex Hunter. He was the Boulder DA. he stonewalled. He fought against getting warrants. He fought against investigations. One of the key pieces of evidence, again, this might surprise you, that Netflix ignores, is the everything they found: the flashlight, the paintbrush handle, the ransom note, the pen, everything they found that was related. The only thing that was used in the crime that wasn't directly linked to the house was the nylon cord that was used to bind her wrists and make the garrote that strangled her. For those that don't know, the garrote is the tied knot with the bar used. It's like you ever see the spy movies when they come behind somebody with the rope, choke them out. That's a garrote. And they strangled her. Excuse me. It's very interesting. The nylon cord, which is a kind of a really important piece of evidence. There's a store in Boulder called McGuckin's. And McGuckin's, the cops found a receipt for McGuckin's. Patsy Ramsey had shopped there. $2, and there was a transaction on the receipt, $2.29. They went to McGuckin's, and guess what McGuckin's sells for $2.29? A spool of the nylon cord that they were able to match exactly to the cord used to bind her, which, by the way, her hair was in the knots, evidence that the cord was tied and created in the home, not brought in by an outside party. And the cops figured that out, despite the fact that their request for warrants of credit card transactions, of bank transactions, and of search histories was denied. The DA continued to stonewall the investigation, which, unrelated side note, I'm sure, excuse me, excuse me, Alex Hunter, the attorney, the family attorney for the Ramseys, was a gentleman named William Gray. William Gray and Alex Hunter were co-share owners of investment properties together, which they both swore no conflict of interest. But every step of the way, the police were stonewalled, and they still managed to put together a very, very strong case. So the idea that there was some Keystone Cop bumbling doofus BS is exactly that. And Netflix just completely, they didn't touch on the nylon rope. They didn't touch on the receipts. They didn't touch on the transaction. They didn't touch on the investigation, the time, the FBI, John Ramsey being gone. They just the family ran rampant and they contaminated the crime scene. Idiots. Yep. And it's like, it was just such that goes to what I was talking about in my intro, was the intellectual dishonesty is at that point borderline fraud. You're not just being misleading, you are intentionally framing a false narrative and ignoring key pieces of evidence to do so.
Definitely.
Then can you go back a minute? When did he, so the police arrived, I think, right before 6 o'clock.
Yes.
After the 911 call. So at some point, John drifted off, disappeared for about an hour.
What ended up happening, as you saw, you posted the pictures earlier, the ransom note, they were expecting a ransom call for conversations. The kidnappers, they were expecting a call from the kidnappers. Between that call not arriving and approximately an hour to 90 minutes later, John Ramsey's whereabouts were not accounted for in the home. He was on the grounds. Obviously, there was no evidence that he left, but he straight up vanished. And that was why he was tasked with that. The reason he was looking for her was specifically because the detectives and the FBI, it was actually the FBI agent on the scene that had controlled the scene at the time, was like, you can't disappear like that. We have to keep an eye on you. Stick with this detective, go upstairs. And instead of going upstairs, he immediately ran to the basement and found her, which just which again, not a lot of people understand that, because that whole narrative was left out because it, heaven forbid, you say anything bad about the family, and it's just. I don't mean to jump on your chat there. I assume it's pronounced Yeah, it's not insider info as much as just like I said, they interviewed experts for this documentary that did less research on this case than I have. When you were in the days of pre Wikipedia internet, you actually had to go to agencies, go to libraries, and I had to get there was no waiver, funny enough, so I was able to talk about it, but we had to get documents signed from the college saying, hey, this is for academic research in order, because it was still 2002, 2004. It was still an open investigation. Some of it was anyway, which, by the way, if that evidence is available online, I recommend not looking at it. Despite the fascination of true crime, you're still talking about autopsy photos and crime scene photos of a dead child. Not something that leaves the memory very quickly.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not something I'd want to see.
Yeah.
Mind-boggling. And I also heard that when the police did arrive, that they were not, I guess, Patsy and John were not like together. I mean, they were like, you know, in the same room, but like nowhere near each other. Where you would think, you know, upon the disappearance of your child, you'd be like, you know, squeezing each other.
You would think, but no. And that actually is interesting, because the initial statements provided to law enforcement about what happened and where they were changed, because I want to touch on something that the documentary really didn't touch much on, is the bowl of pineapple. Prior to the night before, the Ramseys had gone to a party at a friend's house. The story was they came home, the children went to bed, and that was it. We stayed up. At which point, a key piece of evidence that, again, glossed over, not really talked about, is on the counter they found a bowl of pineapple that had been chopped up and prepared as a snack. Both the father, John Ramsey, was the only one in the house whose fingerprints weren't on the bowl itself. Interestingly enough, JonBenét had pineapple in her stomach, which
Yes.
the autopsy confirmed was consumed 2 to 5 hours prior to her death, which her death would have occurred around 1 o'clock in the morning. So you're talking about she consumed the pineapple sometime between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. Now, interestingly enough, again, despite being stonewalled, the police were able to determine that the party that they went to, no pineapple was served, no fruit cocktails, nothing like that. Of course, JonBenét, that was her favorite snack, was pineapple chunks, sliced pineapple and stuff like that. So now, but you were talking about a 6-year-old girl. Highly doubt that she prepared this for herself. What's interesting about the pineapple is even with the police present, like, there were stories of Patsy Ramsey arranging things and wiping stuff down. She was a perfectionist when it came to presentation. When asked about the pineapple, what I think really sticks out is she said, I would never have touched that. And not because she denied serving pineapple, but I would never have mixed that bowl and that spoon. Like, and honestly, the police believe.
Wait, say that one again, Dan. Did you catch what he said, Brittany?
No, he froze up.
Yeah, something about the pineapple. Dan is in a new location temporarily. His home in Norfolk, I believe, had damage because of Hurricane Helene. And yeah, he's staying with some friends or relatives while his house is being rehabbed, and that's going to be a bit. So he doesn't have access to his normal stuff. I keep looking to see if Dave's here, but I can't find him.
Me too.
Yeah, but let me. Here's something that I guess if Dan rejoins us, we can we can keep chatting about. But my understanding, there you go. I bet he'll be right back.
Yeah.
Is that he mentioned they lawyered up the day after. I know I heard it was within 5 days, but I'm not sure. I mean, they weren't going to talk to the police yet. They did that interview with Larry King and CNN. It wasn't that far after the is that Dan? There we go.
Hey, sorry about that. Apparently, little technical issues. But yeah, I was chatting a bit with your active chat there. Great as always. Yes, the interesting note on the pineapple was both parents testified they didn't serve her any before she went to bed, which also changed the story of she was up in the kitchen but she wasn't in the kitchen. She was in bed. She wasn't in bed. But no, my point, and I don't know how much you heard before I froze there for a second, was Patsy Ramsey was a perfectionist with presentation. When asked about the bowl of pineapple, which by the way, her fingerprints were on, as were the son's, she said she would never have served her that, not because she didn't serve pineapple, but I would never have mixed that bowl in that spoon. Just the mentality of, this could be a clue to what happened to your daughter. Well, I don't know anything about it. I would never use that spoon with that serving bowl. And she's right. The spoon was far too big for the bowl in question. Kind of like anybody that remembers making a big bowl of Captain Crunch to watch, football or Saturday morning cartoons, always get the biggest spoon in the pantry, right? It did lead a lot of credence to some of the investigators suspecting that her brother may have prepared that pineapple for her, which again kills the narrative of them being in bed and everyone being asleep and out and about. And the pineapple, which was in her stomach and is a key piece of evidence of what she may have been doing prior to her death, not even talked about, completely ignored.
Right.
Which, again, not only changes the narrative, but shows that the initial testimony given to the police by the family was false.
Right.
Yep.
Now, Dan, what was I think you said they lawyered up within a day, and then how soon were they on Larry King?
Well, that was actually to go what I was talking about earlier with the family friends that were raising concerns. They had gone from Colorado to Georgia, where the service was being held. And while they were in Georgia, the investigators were trying to get them back to Colorado to talk to them. They were stonewalling the police, lawyer demands, crazy demands about, we only want to answer questions related to this. We want to do it this time of day. Just insane, just asinine requests that they knew the police, or at least you would assume that they wouldn't know the police could never meet. And while they were doing this, they were booking media tours. So you're talking about, we want to find our child. We want to prove our innocence, but we're not going to talk to the police. We're going to go talk to Larry King. We're going to go talk to, if you remember, Geraldo did a mock trial on his show.
Yes.
Where, with the evidence available at the time, and his audience pretty much unanimously said the family or somebody, the parents were involved. And it's just, they were obviously, you remember they were on Larry King, which by the way, was Netflix framed this as, Larry King wanted to clear the air because he was such a good and respected journalist. We got to get the truth out there. It's like, no, the media, the family wasn't being hounded by the media. Like, please come talk to us. We're doing everything we can to clear you. It was, we know nothing about this case because you haven't said a damn word to anybody. We want to get the facts out there. It's the media. They want to, and this was, pre what people think about the media today. They wanted to get the evidence out there. And if talking to the cameras was the only way that was going to happen, that's how it was going to happen. It had nothing to do with the, the media inquiries being some proof of innocence.
I don't know. Again, if it's my child, I'm living at the police station.
Absolutely.
Give me a list of 5,000 things I need to do to help you, and I'll do them all. And then, I'll come back and give me, another list of 5,000 things.
Right.
I mean, that's what a grieving parent does.
At the risk of oversharing, quick personal story for a moment. When I was in the military, one of the sailors that worked for me was accused of violent acts and sexual heinous crimes. I don't want to get into the details of it, but I was security oversight for him while we were clearing some stuff. So I'm sitting in an office. He's sitting in a chair. He asks about food. They bring him something to eat, and he's just kind of like, whatever, like another day. And I didn't know the specifics of the case at the time because, obviously a lot of that's tight-lipped. But as the evidence started putting together, I said the same thing you did. I would have been kicking down every door I could think of to be like, that wasn't me. I didn't do that. What do you need from me to prove that I didn't do that? And he didn't care. Of course, he did it, but he didn't care. And that's what kills me with the family is it was such an intentional and malicious attempt to just not only stop the police from investigating you, but stop the police from investigating other real leads. They sent them on goose chases. They accused anybody they could get their hands on, most of which had solid alibis, or there was, again, as I mentioned, with the window, there was zero evidence of a break-in. So this idea that they kept pushing, if someone broke into the house, or like Nah, they really didn't. They couldn't have. Which, by the way, something else that's noted when we talked about the ransom note earlier is the basement door opens from the inside. Or excuse me, it opens from the outside. So, it's not like somebody could come. If you were to have broken into the house, it would have been very hard to just come up the basement and leave. You would have had to have gone out the same way you came in. So this person came up through, entered a room with no entrances and exits through an unopened window, and then managed to come through a locked door to write a ransom note, and then left through the same way while closing everything behind them twice. It doesn't fit, and it threw off time. It threw off information, and it's very, very sad, very shady. And again, you talk about real evidence. I look at the notes that I was sent earlier. Another key piece I think that's very important is the DNA. They actually had DNA evidence, and Netflix framed this DNA evidence as it didn't match the family. Okay, right. We're done. Everyone's innocent. Didn't match the family. That's not how DNA works. The DNA evidence was found on her was trace amounts. Yes, there was hairs in the blanket, but those could have been there before. It was a blanket, of course, the one their father wrapped her in. It really ignores how DNA evidence works. When you have trace, which by the way, some of the DNA evidence was found on her in areas she shouldn't have other people's DNA. Again, not wanting to get into graphic detail. When you have trace amounts of DNA, you form an incomplete profile. And which from the incomplete profile, what you do is you actually have what in the criminal justice world is known as non-incriminating evidence, which means the DNA evidence, it doesn't directly incriminate anyone, but it also can't be used to definitively rule anyone out either. Whereas, with a partial DNA profile, if I could say, I have enough DNA here to determine that the killer had AB blood, then I can rule out anyone in the building that's A, O, whatever. But if I only have a partial marker, let's say I have an A marker, but I don't have the B marker, I can't rule out AB blood. I can only rule out people that have just B or whatever. So you can partially rule people out. And I think that's the key piece of evidence that was just completely glossed over is the DNA didn't exonerate the family. It created a profile where police investigators were unable to conclude who specifically the DNA belonged to. However, the profile did have enough shared markers with the DNA of the family, the parents, the son, and some others involved that they could not definitively rule anyone out either. So to say like, oh, the family the DNA didn't match, that's proof of innocence. It's I'm sure you've heard the adage, the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence. This idea that just because the DNA didn't directly match somebody, that's TV shows, that's Bones, that's right. CSI, where you're going to find a perfect DNA profile in 45 minutes. It doesn't work that way. The DNA evidence was complete enough that there were markers that you could not definitively rule out the family. Yes, you couldn't definitively link it to anyone, but you could also not definitively rule out any of the suspects, which means to treat the DNA evidence as proof that they're innocent is again intellectually dishonest. And it's a key piece when the evidence is combined with the window, the crime, the fact that everything belonged in the house. You start piecing together every the idea of TV shows love to kind of dismiss the circumstantial evidence. When you have a plethora of circumstantial evidence, that is enough to form a case. And when you talk about we've got DNA that can't rule you out, we've got evidence that you purchased the supplies that were used in the crime, we've got this you wrote the ransom note, we've got all this evidence compiled, it really starts to paint a very clear picture.
Yeah, and you threw out that number that when the victim is found in the house, 99% of the time it's somebody in the house. And now you have this boatload of evidence that does nothing but add to that 99%. You're not chipping away at the 99%. You're adding to it.
Yeah, even if you had DNA evidence that didn't match the family, which you'd obviously test people at the party the night before. The crime scene investigators concluded definitively through the windows, through the doors, through everything, there was zero evidence of a break-in. So and there was also zero evidence of an exit. So if there was a stranger in the house, then they would have been in the home while the detectives and investigators were there. The only place they could have hidden was the crawl space, which, again, Netflix completely ignores. There is definitive evidence that the crawl space was vacant. There is no evidence that a person, because that's the first thing you do. If they're hiding, that's where you're going to look, because you could access the crawl space from the basement, the wine, not the wine cellar where she was found, but the basement. They were able to rule out anybody being in the crawl space. So every corner, like you were just saying, every piece of evidence you find definitively rules out a third party. This is someone in the home.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying, Brittany. Wow. And the other thing is, they made it sound in the docuseries as if, that what's the DA's name? Was it Alex Hunter was the DA?
Yes.
That they went to indict them, but he chose not to prosecute because, according to the show, he didn't think there'd be a strong case of conviction because there wasn't enough evidence. But it sounds like the fact that there was a relationship between the Ramsey's attorney and him. I mean, they don't speak any of that at all, do they?
No.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's also worth noting that during the investigation, he was in constant contact with the family and the attorneys. Every piece of evidence, every lead, everything that crossed his desk went to them immediately, which, while not technically a violation of evidentiary laws, does lead to the potential for evidence contamination, invalidity, and it's just something you don't do. You don't send your primary suspects every piece of evidence you're gathering on them during the investigation.
Right.
That's not how disclosure laws work. And the fact is the Ramseys had connections in the DA's office, and they were able to squash and silence some of this. And, detectives and police officers have gone on record and said, if we wanted a warrant to investigate random guy number 6, we had it in our hand that day. If we needed a warrant for phones research that would point towards the Ramseys, we don't know the evidence. They dragged the DA office dragged their feet on it.
Yeah.
And because I'm not saying, again, there's, you can't explicitly say bias or it was one sided, whatever, but the narrative, again, Netflix takes the narrative of, the DA chose not to prosecute, therefore innocent. Again, that's not how crime works. Like, think about some of the high profile cases, of people that are, I hate to say, universally agreed to have been guilty, who for one reason or another weren't charged or were charged for lesser offenses. Just because you're not prosecuted with something, that doesn't mean the DA's office goes, well, we decided you didn't do it. It's, we decided we might not have a strong enough case, which, again, me personally, it's just my opinion. If they presented the evidence as laid out, especially when you talk about handwriting experts and everything else, you would have gotten them with something, period.
Definitely.
Yeah. The person I really felt for was the what's his name, Steve Thomas, because it did seem like he really, busted his butt in this case, and he put his heart and soul into it. And, everything that he came up with was, all for naught.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like,
what a shame.
Absolutely. Anybody that's ever, worked for a boss that's, dismissed your work at the last minute, like he did. And some of the leads he followed up on, like I said, the receipt for the $2.29 charge of nylon rope, which they were able to definitively link in laboratories, because anybody that knows how you buy rope at a store, I can prove to you through, for lack of a better description, through rope fiber connections, that the rope that you have, in this case it was nylon cord, the cord that you have came from the spool at the store. Like, I could 100%, no doubt, $2.29 mini spool cut from the spool at the store. She bought $2.29 charge a few days before this all went down. It's like, you just, there's so much where, you put her on the stand. What did you buy for $2.29? Like,
yeah,
right.
Who knows?
Yeah. What a shame. What a travesty.
It is, and hang on for a second. I want to, something we really haven't talked about, but
it would be easy. But
There we go.
I have been trying
Yeah, I
to
mean,
figure out.
what is your guys' opinions of these pageants? I really, they
I realized is that
I don't know. I know that she was, meaning Patsy was a pageant winner. I think she was Miss West Virginia, 1977. I personally,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's like dressing little girls like hookers is really not in the
That's what it
best.
looks like to me.
Yeah. And some of the,
Some of the stuff is crazy.
It was an invite for pedophiles, in my opinion. Not
Yeah,
that happened,
yeah.
but I'm saying, like, I don't know. I mean, the kid was a prop. We last week we were talking about was Gypsy Rose Blanchard. She was a prop. She was the mother's cash cow. It sounds like this is kind of the same thing in a way.
Oh yeah.
This girl could not have a normal life. She had to train. She had to perform. I can't imagine this was her idea. I mean, although she seemed like she was a natural at it, but I don't know. Like a kid should be a kid. You only get one chance to grow up. I mean, a guy like me who's never grown up. I mean, but I'm the exception to the rule. So Dan,
I agree with you. I mean, a perfect example of ruining someone's childhood. Look at that Honey Boo Boo. Look
oh my God,
and I'll just leave it at that.
I mean, I think Gypsy Rose is probably the worst ever. As far as like Munchausen's by proxy. I mean, that was an absolute horror. But I mean, this wasn't like the case. But I mean, this woman was, I believe, Patsy was living vicariously through her daughter because she couldn't be in the pageants anymore. By the way, Dan, she looked really heavily medicated or intoxicated on Larry King. Or was that just me?
No, you're correct. Behavioral experts have said that she was what you can't definitively say under the influence, but you can say that the markers for her behavior were not ones traditionally seen with psychological issues, but chemical ones.
Right.
So yeah, if you thought she looked blitzed on Larry King, that's probably because odds are she was on something.
Yeah.
All right. And then the one last question I had was, and I'm not sure which these. I don't think it was on the docuseries, but somewhere I saw that Fleet White who's the friend of the family, the one that went down in the basement with John, made a 911 call a couple of days earlier
from the house. Yes.
And what was that about?
It was just some domestic squabbles
between John and Patsy.
There was, anytime you have, I wasn't there, so I can only judge based on later recantations. But whenever you have those crowds, you think about you were talking about the pageants a second ago. You think about the kind of people that live in those social circles. You get enough of them together, there's going to be sometimes you're going to have a powder keg of snootiness, and that's sort of what it led to.
A lot of egos there, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that's very, very, put 27 very competitive.
I feel bad White on his end because he was fingered by the family, but also only after he made it very clear that something is not right here. Like he had a phone conversation with John where it's like, dude, you have to come back to Colorado and talk to the police. Like, what are you doing? You're booking ABC interviews and you're not talking to the cops. Why is it like? And White said he felt like I cared more about finding your daughter's killer than you do, and it was maybe it was you then, and the poor guy had his life turned upside down because he raised the question of why are you not interested in this? Kind of like I hate to use the comparison, but kind of like the amount of effort OJ put into investigating finding the real killers after his trial ended. Checked every golf course from here to Reseda, right?
Oh yeah. And I mean, they were no longer friends, right? That was it after the murder.
Correct. That. Yep. Well, absolutely. Yeah. You're. I mean, people had been friends for many years. Like, I helped you, I helped you find your daughter. Like, we did all this, you're going to throw me under the bus to hide something. Like, yeah, I could fully understand why that collapsed.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, the hour went by quick. So, what are your guys' best guess and what actually happened? Brittany, start with you.
I feel like it's the brother, and that he was super, super, super jealous of her, and he exploded and he killed her. And I think Patsy might have walked in on it and got him out of there and got him cleaned up and got the husband, and the husband moved her or added things, or I think they were all in on it. But the actual killer, I think, was the brother.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, I actually, I think it was a victim of circumstance in the situation. The head wound is a key piece of evidence in that the damage caused by the flashlight, the bag light from the home, would have been swung. There's two possible explanations with her positioning of her head, which would have put her in a kind of an unnatural bending position, or the blow came from a slightly upward angle, which means you're talking about someone shorter swinging that flashlight. Also, the damage to the head would have been significantly more from someone stronger. If an adult my size had bashed her over the head with that flashlight, it would have killed her instantly. I believe, and this is just, again, my opinion based on what I've studied, I believe that it was her brother that struck her in the head with the flashlight, and then the rest of it, the ransom note, the garrote, the bonding, the hiding, the bullshit, was all the parents attempting to just kind of cover their tracks, as it were, cover the family's tracks. I think John was in the basement setting everything up while the mom was upstairs writing the ransom note. They got their story straight, called 911.
Do we see this solved in our lifetime?
Nope.
This is OJ, Jack the Ripper stuff. You'll have, even if you have a universal agreement of here's what actually happened, you'll never have definitive legal closure.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
and it's a shame that kid, allegedly got away with it and is living a completely normal life, and could be having kids of his own now. I mean, this is concerning. Imagine being his girlfriend, his wife, and
I think he would be. He did that interview on Dr. Phil. I think he was about 29 or 30, about 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it. I don't know if you guys saw it, but I saw little snippets. He looked kind of creepy. I mean, and I don't know if it was more to me than nervous creepy, though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There was like something wrong with him.
No, you are 100% correct on that one, Brittany.
Yeah, he just
definitely.
It was, and leave it to Dr. Phil, man. He's right in the middle of all these things.
I know. He picks up where Geraldo left off.
Yeah, but I like him. I mean, he did a really good job to me as far as breaking down like Gypsy Rose's whole situation prior, like that led up to what happened. And not that he excused it, but he really painted a very good word picture of, the tortures that this poor girl had to endure. Yeah, she spent 8.5 years in prison, but in reality, she spent her first 24 years in prison as well. Just, a different prison in her own home, but a prison nonetheless. And I thought he did a really great job. So I'm going to have to catch the interview with Kirk Ramsey. But yeah, I guess it's going to be one of these things that, it's going to be what it is. But so I guess we'll wrap it up. Once again, thanks to everyone in the chat room, as well as the millions and
millions
of true crime fans around the world. We have many great cases queued up for you. So make sure you subscribe to the Monty and the Pharaoh YouTube channel so you don't miss any notifications. And don't forget to join yours truly and Dan to tomorrow night at 7 for another great episode of Dan and Benny in the Ring. We're actually going to be presenting the annual 2024 Dan and Benny Awards. This is a must-see show. You don't want to miss it.
Ooh.
Yeah. So for the bad girl, for Dangerous Dave in absentia, for Dan the Man, and for yours truly, the Playa, want to tell you all to stay safe and see you next time. Good night, all.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.
Oh yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
There is not. And you are